Welcome. A reminder that we are recording today's live learning series, so it will be available for you to watch afterwards or to enjoy over a glass of wine again when we're talking about some amazing things in the space of teacher wellness. My name is Dan Dempsey. I am the Director of Professional Learning with Future Anything. Really excited to have you with us today. If you haven't joined us before for live learning, it is our professional development series to talk to really cool people doing cool things, movers, shakers, thinkers, and doers on all sorts of topics related to learning and entrepreneurial mindsets in the classrooms. Today, we're talking about teacher wellness. We know that teaching's never been more demanding, but perhaps what if a strong wellbeing focus could be the key to thriving, not just surviving? We're going to approach this topic from a number of layers at self-care, at school, middle school leader level, wider school level, and also with community. Now, I am joining you from Brisbane, from the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people. As always, I'd love to know where you are joining us from. Please put into the chat the lands that you are joining us from around the country and say hello, introduce yourself in the chat. While we're doing that, I'll just love to say that this can be a really highly topical conversation. We're excited to share some practical strategies to support teacher and school wellbeing. If you are feeling overwhelmed or if you need any individual support, please check out the chat. We're going to drop in some resources that are available if you are looking for any more urgent help around wellbeing. All right, great to see all of those First Nations places are coming through the chat. Okay, I've got Nick here in the background also helping to run the chat. I'd love to see your questions. So if you have anything you'd like to know about wellbeing or dig deeper into some of the answers from our guests, then please put your question in the chat. We'd also love you to share what works for you. So if there's a resource, a strategy, a technique, or something that you'd like to share around wellbeing, please also put it into the chat. We're going to gather them all up together and make that part of our post-program email. It's now time, though, that I'd love to take this opportunity. I'm thrilled to be joined by two guests today. We have Amy Green with us, who is from the Wellness Strategy. Amy's a keynote speaker, facilitator, author, consultant. Really pumped that Amy can join us today. And we have Liam Casson, CEO at Reset Moves, head of Wellbeing and Education at Seafeld Investments. It is an absolute privilege to have them with us. So let's dive in and ask our guests to introduce themselves a little. So I'd love you to tell us kind of a little bit more about who you are, what your background is, what your role is, and can you add for us what is your go-to self-care method or strategy of choice? I know for me, it's running. I take my shoes wherever I go, and it's really important if I'm traveling that that's one outlet I use. Amy, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. We're going to have a great conversation today, and I'm really excited for it. So I run the Wellness Strategy, and it was really created out of wanting to help educators and school leaders and schools themselves work in places that are great and allow people to understand what wellbeing is for them personally, but also what does it look like when we come together collectively. So my background is in education. I was a teacher and then also a school leader myself, and I've taught in Australia and overseas and in a wide number of schools with different ways of working, but also different students and different community needs. So I've got a pretty big and broad range and understanding of what it's like to work in different schools. And I think it really doesn't matter where you work. Every school can be stressful and every school can be great. But as we start to see things shift in workplaces, my role is primarily around helping schools become great workplaces, not just schools where we're reactive to our to-do list. And it can be done if we're willing to be creative and think outside the box and, do things a little bit differently. And that's one of the biggest challenges, right? We can sometimes think differently or see good ideas, but It's how to put them into action that can sometimes be the hardest piece, or the bit that we really need to focus on. And I don't think that's any different for our own self-care. And I can very much fall into the trap of knowing exactly what to do or what I should do and doing the opposite. But my go-to, it changes. It depends on what's happening in my life, how I'm feeling. At the moment, my go-to is rest. And it's just getting outside and sitting in the sun. I've done that a few times a day, going for a walk without having any headphones, or sometimes leaving my phone at home, which does create internal panic, but I survive. I'm only going around the block. Reading a fiction book, just for fun. Not everything has to be about learning. So finding different ways to rest and understanding that rest and sleep are not the same. So usually I'm really working on sleep, but at the moment it's those little micro moments of rest throughout the busy day.
Thanks, Amy. I love that. And for me, those little moments of disconnection, I need to do way more of it, but really, really important. Thank you. Liam, please tell us about yourself.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, Dan, and good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, it's a real privilege to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. Yeah, so as Dan, you mentioned, I'm currently the CEO of Reset Moves. I'm also the head of wellbeing and education at Seafeld Investments. So I'm really fortunate to work across a few different businesses. Before that, I was the director of health and wellbeing at Christchurch Grammar School. So I had the great pleasure and privilege of working really closely with leadership teams, obviously students, families, a range of different parents, and yeah, it was a real privilege. So for me, a variety of roles in the wellbeing space, something that I'm incredibly passionate about. Yeah, and like I said, just really looking forward to the conversation today. For me, the biggest thing that supports my wellbeing, and it's something that we need to regularly be checking in on, but for me, it's physical activity. So for me, I love my exercise, and it's my therapy in a lot of ways. I try and get it done early in the morning before the day sort of captures you a little bit, because we're all busy and there's lots and lots of things on, lots of commitments. But for me, physical activity, just short, sharp bursts, releasing that dopamine, that serotonin, that makes me feel better, and it's obviously a great way to start the day. And then to that, I think it's really just the quality of relationships that I have within my immediate circle. So thinking for me, as a father to three kids, there's never a dull moment, and it's always very, very busy and noisy at my house, but trying as much as possible to capture quality moments with each of my three beautiful kids and my lovely wife.
Love that, Liam. I relate to that on many levels around what you just spoke about with physical activity and being a dad and father and wanting to find those really meaningful connections with family at home. I spoke about how we were going to tackle this topic from a number of different layers. So let's kind of make that segue from the self-care examples that you gave and go into potentially how you can help our audience to think about other ways that they could prioritize their own well-being. These could be proactive strategies, knowing that we go into really busy parts of the term and the year, or potentially things that can be used in the moment when things are becoming a little bit stressful and overwhelming. Amy, can I throw to you?
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing when we're talking about wellbeing and self-care is to be really mindful that not everyone's strategy or toolkit is the same. And sometimes we can fall into the trap of thinking that it's a one-size-fits-all approach. And, all three of us can definitely say, yeah, we love exercise and we get out there and run or do it in the morning, and that's great. But might be people here who perhaps it's different for them, or it's not available because of what they've got going on in their life. And so we've really got to acknowledge that. My first tip is build a toolkit that works for you based on the circumstances you have within your reality and what you can do. And so if you're thinking, gosh, maybe I need to do more exercise and I need to do it every day, and that's not optimal for you within what you've got going on, let's aim for 2 or 3 times a week. Get out there, because movement we know is key to reducing stress, to helping with energy, those types of things. But it could be so many other things. When we talk about what's in our wellbeing or self-care toolkit, the ability to slow down. So having that, what Adam Fraser calls the third space between work and home, going for a walk around the block, sitting with your pets, giving yourself a few moments of deep breathing. It could be nutritious food, because that food is actually energy, and it connects not just to how we feel, but also to how we think. So there's a wide range of ways to tap into different wellbeing and self-care strategies. So my first tip is always figure out what you need, not what the person next to you is doing in their classroom, not what your colleague or your sibling is doing, or not what the person you follow on Instagram is doing. We've got to try and test, and sometimes things work for us and sometimes they don't, and you've got to be really okay with that. And then my second tip, especially when things are busy, and we are really, as educators, guilty of saying we're always busy all of the time. And there is an element of busier times. Term two, report writing, it's coming. Some people will be surprised though, and I don't know why. I don't know why we have people going, oh, reports are here already. We know it's coming, so plan for it. I think one of the things that we underestimate is our ability to plan for normal stresses and be able to preempt when they're coming. And that's not just let's get ready to get through the stressful period. It's what does my body need to be able to function well cognitively and physically as I get through this space? So where are my foundations? Do I actually in that time really need to think about, what am I eating and get that ready? Because when we're busy, we tend to just grab takeout. Do I need to really have a solid sleep routine and know what that's going to look like and do a little bit of self-parenting and put myself to bed on time because it's so easy to just press play on that next episode of whatever we're trying to watch rather than actually prioritize sleep. So we've got to know, when am I hitting stress and how can I plan for that and get ready rather than adopt this, I'll just survive and get through it and then I'll completely crash in holidays.
Amy, can I just quickly follow up a question to that? Do you think it's important to help by giving some of that accountability for your own self-care to get someone to help you with that? As in, if you're at home and you're planning those meals, you're asking your partner or someone else to, hey, where are you at with that this week?
Yeah, I think this is where we can start to step into the space of boundaries as well. So we often think of it as like we want to set a boundary around sleep or we want to have a boundary around how time is used. And we start these habits, but we don't always communicate them with other people. So sleep is a great example. You might decide that, you really need to be in bed by 9 o'clock. You need to get your 8 hours sleep, whatever that is, but you don't tell people in your house. And so all of a sudden you've got teenage kids making lots of noise. Your partner's trying to have a conversation with you at 8 p.m. about planning a holiday or finances, and you're trying to wind down. And so what we do is we have a tendency to get annoyed or then think, oh, you know what, it's not possible. We need to communicate that. It's as simple as, you know what, I really need to get sleep over this next season. It's going to be quite busy. So after 7 p.m., the house is quiet. And I do this in my house with my partner. We're not talking any type of business, any type of life, anything that requires my brain after 7 o'clock. And if it creeps in and a conversation starts, I'm like, it's past 7, we're not doing it. So you've got to have your boundaries, communicate them and know why it's important, definitely. And then people will start to support and follow.
I think my wife's going to be expecting a conversation from me this evening. Liam, can we throw the same question to you? Any practical strategies that you've got that people can use for their own self-care?
Yeah, well, I think Amy touched on all of those very eloquently, and there's going to be a bit of crossover. But I think it's first of all just to acknowledge that you can't serve from an empty vessel. And I know that many people on the call would have heard of the analogy or seen the analogy in previous presentations around the oxygen mask. Like, you've got to put the oxygen mask on yourself first. So I think it's acknowledging that, you are absolutely worth it. And I think teachers and educators specifically, we're drawn to the profession because we want to make a positive difference. We are people. So we want to serve others as much as possible. But I think it's just acknowledging and really deliberately and consciously making the choice that you are worth it. So I think it's important to find out what your ways to wellbeing is. There's lots of frameworks, there's lots of references, there's a lot of emerging literature and research around this particular space. But like Amy said very, very well, it's finding out what works for your context. And what I would say there is that you are absolutely the expert of your context. You know when the busy points of the year are, and Amy touched on obviously term 2. I mean, I would argue that every term in a school environment is incredibly busy. There's no quiet time at all. But just being really deliberate around acknowledging that you are absolutely worth it and making it a priority in some way. And the second one for me would be starting small. It might be addressing your sleep. It might be getting, to bed a little bit earlier. It might be incorporating a little bit more physical activity if that's your thing. It might be giving yoga, the opportunity to have a bit of a go there to increase your flexibility and give yourself a little bit of me time. I mean, there's so many different reference points, but I would really try and find out in your core around what you feel are your best ways to wellbeing. And like I said, I think it should be something that's done consistently. Shouldn't be something that you're doing regularly just during the summer period because you might have a little bit more time on your hands. But thinking about it and maybe shifting the narrative a little bit that it's a performance enabler, because we know that when we're feeling good, generally we're performing better, whether that's as an educator, whether that's as a friend, as a husband, as a wife, as a partner. So I think just shifting the narrative a little bit, being kind to yourself, but starting small and looking to build out. And what I would love to do is just provide a tangible takeaway for that question for those that are listening, is what's one thing that you could do that could support your well-being? And again, referencing what Amy's already touched on and hopefully what I've shared, you're the expert of your context. So what's one thing that you can do to support you? Is it going to bed a little bit earlier? Is it stretching in the morning? Is it giving yourself a little bit of me time through the course of the week to read a good book? Starting small and building from there.
Thank you, Liam. I love that. Love to see some of those things come through the chat to answer that question as well. But we know there's multiple layers around teacher wellness in schools and education. And so self-care is a really important part of that. But I'd love to go to the next layer around, I guess, the middle leadership or small teams that exists within schools. Amy, any suggestions on what middle leaders can do to support the well-being of their team in a, I guess, a sustainable everyday way?
Yeah, I think this is where we need to make the distinction that when we're talking about workplace well-being, it's not necessarily a leader's role to make sure you go to bed on time. And sometimes we can think, our leaders should be teaching us about different things around stress management or sleep or mindfulness, and we're all educators. We're not trained in that. So this is where we really, as individuals, need to lean on the experts. And I know Nick's put some of those in the chat already, but also be really, I think, grateful at the moment that we are seeing this influx of self-help, self-development, building personal well-being, and listen to a podcast, watch a YouTube clip, watch a TED Talk. There's so many out there. Our leaders, middle leaders, higher leaders in a school, their job is to provide the conditions to ensure that workload doesn't mean we can't look after our well-being. So if workload is so high that stress is impossible, then we've got to talk about that through a team lens. And I think this is where middle leaders need to be really mindful and tune into where might the stress factors exist within my team? And is that because workload is too high and we can look at that differently? Is it perhaps our systems, our structures, our processes aren't clear, aren't known? Is it because we're reactive? Maybe we need to take a step back and actually plan for what's coming ahead. Are we trying to do too many things at once? And I think many leaders would say, yep, all of those things are true. And to support well-being, not just of those we lead, but also for ourselves, we have to, and I think this is hard to do because we're always go, 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 but we have to stop. We just have to stop for like a minute and ask ourselves, if we could do one thing differently that would support well-being, what would it be? If we could stop doing something, and can we actually stop it? Then what would that be? We've got to know what we have to do, and then we've got to also bring awareness to what we're doing because we think it makes our school great, but it might be adding to higher workload. So a leader's job is not to make sure that we all eat healthy and exercise. It's actually to scan and assess and to ask, is how we're working efficient, effective, and allowing people to do so with energetic sustainability, not just for those they lead, but also for themselves.
Love that. Thank you, Amy. And those systems and processes are really critical. Liam, any thoughts around that same space, working in teams in schools?
Well, I think it's first of all just acknowledging that it's a privilege to be in a middle management position. And I really do think that the greatest way to teach is to model. So you really want to be living and practicing what you preach. So going at an individual level, making sure that you're keeping that a consistent priority. But I think as a leader, as a manager within a school environment, you have the opportunity to build connections and relationships. And the best way to do that is checking in with your colleagues consistently. That can be really challenging or through the course of a school day because there's many things that might present. But those check-ins, whether it's just anecdotal feedback, it's corridor conversations at lunchtime, if you have the good fortune to go and have a quick cup of tea before you're back into period 5 and 6. So I think they are really important. But I also think something tangible for the audience today is to consider how you might be able to get that information from your colleagues. And it might be, like I said, in those corridor conversations, in those consistent WIP catch-ups, but maybe even just exploring the opportunity of asking a couple of questions formally. There's lots of teacher surveys out there, and some of those can be quite costly. So it depends on where you are and where you're dispersing capital in terms of the priorities of your school. But you can also do that quite simply through an email or SurveyMonkey, because I do think as middle managers, sometimes we don't exactly know, how our colleagues are tracking. So I think it's capturing it in a way that is authentic and real for your school environment. But then the most important thing is actioning the things that come out of that survey or those questions. And it's something really tangible. And it makes me think of a previous environment that I was fortunate to work in, and Amy touched on it. Sometimes as a middle leader, you want to create structures and systems just to get out of the way. So an example is one of the bits of feedback that staff gave in a recent survey that I worked with was very simply during staff PD days, try not to put too many policy meetings in there where they're just sitting there for at the start of the start of a school year, and they're just bombarded with content. And their motivation, the intrinsic motivation and drive sort of lacks. You kind of just think, geez, this is going to be tough going. So something really simply is that they're wanting more feedback to prepare for their classroom environment, or more focused on their lesson plans. And it was really, really simplistic, but the school didn't know that until they really asked that question. So I would just consider the opportunity to consistently check in with your colleagues in a way that feels authentic and comfortable for you. But definitely look to explore the concept of surveying and doing it in a way, as I said, that fits your context. I think would be really important. And then thirdly to that, actioning what your staff are telling you.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Amy, I'm wondering if you've got any advice for the teachers that are listening around ways that they could potentially manage up to a leader around some of these things that Liam's talking about, if that's not in the cultural context of the school?
Yeah, I think this is where we've got to start to put down the idea that leadership starts at the top, and sitting back and thinking, oh, well, leadership aren't doing anything. And I run lots of qualitative data sessions in schools, and I hear time and time again things that are genuine stress factors or things that aren't working that well in schools. And I always ask, who have you told about this? Not who have you gossiped with it about in the car park, but who have you actually told? And often the answer is, well, no one, we haven't told anyone. And our leaders can't help us if they don't know. And we've got to remember our leaders definitely want wellbeing to be better or improve or to be a focus area in our school. No leader is sitting around going, how do we make it worse? That's not happening. So we've got to start to understand that we all play a role in speaking up and seeking out what this looks like. And I think my advice would be as specific as you can. So when I hear things like workload's too high or we're stressed, that doesn't actually provide enough granular data to action. So my advice would be really figure out where the core things are that are falling down. I'll give you a great example. I had a teacher not too long ago sharing with me that they just needed more time for assessment. And I asked quite a few questions to find out what was going on with this. And what actually was happening was that this teacher was being asked to assess on a Thursday and put data in on a Friday. That's not the time. Time is not the issue here. We can't find more time for that. That's actually around the process. So the idea or the suggestion or a better solution for that would be to look at our assessment and data entry timeline and shift that, because we control that. We control when the data goes in, we control when assessments are done. And so we've got to start to take a step back and not just think workload's high, we're all stressed, leaders fix it, but really start to review it in a pragmatic way that allows us to actually look at the solutions, because there are solutions hidden, I think, when we see people with heads in their hand or with everyone saying, I need to tap out. And too often we think, oh, we'll just put on a morning tea or we'll cancel meetings because people are tired. But that data is invaluable for change. So we've got to start to leverage that and be a little bit more curious about where it comes from and know that it's possible to do things differently.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Amy. So let's kind of continue in that direction, Liam, around at that whole school level. Any thoughts around a couple of different approaches that school leadership can take to create that culture and strategic direction in order to create wellbeing that's not just a one-off initiative, but maybe part of how the school operates?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in my experience, it comes across three key areas. It's program, it's policy, and it's practice. And I think if they're done synergistically, then it creates the most significant impact. And I think Amy and myself have touched on a few different points today around how wellbeing needs to be infused across every aspect of the school. you do see a lot of really good things being done from a program perspective. So it might be a meditation session as part of a lunch and learn session. That's fantastic in of itself. But I think at times, in my experience, it's the policy and it's the practice consistently that might be lacking. And again, everyone on the call is the expert of their context. They know where they are in the scheme of things. But I would be very, very deliberate around, at a school level, you want to make it holistic. So thinking about your programs and being really specific about what you need, because like Amy touched on, there is no magic pill. What works, for example, at the school across the road might be very different to your context. So being very, very deliberate around why you're selecting programs and how you're incorporating that, not just from a student level, but from a staffing perspective, and also engaging your parents, because we know that collaboration is a key enabler to obviously a well-informed and quality practice. And then I would really consider at a whole school level is thinking about the policies that are in place. And what I would suggest to anyone on the call, if you can have the good fortune and opportunity to consider incorporating or speaking to your leaders, or perhaps there might be a few leaders on the call, around how can you infuse wellbeing within your strategic intents, because we know that we measure what we value and we value what we measure. So if we can put it in some way, shape or form, then it gets measured, it gets valued, and it builds that sense of credibility as well. So a really strong push there. And then finally, just the consistency of practice. I know Professor Donna Cross does some amazing work. And one of the things that she referenced is something as small as staff engaging with one another as they're walking past in a corridor can make a significant difference to one's wellbeing. It's the same thing when you're welcoming a class as they walk in, really seeing, really valuing the individuals and the collective that you're fortunate to work with. So really thinking about that visible wellbeing, and I know Professor Lee Waters does some incredible work in this space, but it's infusing it across the board. And sometimes that can be really, really challenging because it's kind of like a really, really mixed bag of lollies. But thinking about what your context, how can you incorporate more programs that are effective to your context, thinking about policies, and then obviously thinking about the consistency of your practice.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Liam. Amy, I'd be interested if you've got anything that you can kind of add to that same question. But then at the same time, do you have any particular resources or suggestions for where schools can go to access some more support around this topic from a school policy point of view?
Yeah, I think perhaps not school policy. I think if you work in a state school, a department school, those policies are there. It's about considering, how do our practices and how do our expectations or standards support wellbeing. So I might look at this question through workplace wellbeing rather than building that individual toolkit for people. And I think at a school level, what we know about workplace wellbeing is that there are a few key things that come into play. So one is productivity. People want to feel like they can be efficient at their job, that they're able to work with ease. The second one is around engagement. They're engaged with their work, they're engaged with their colleagues. And the last one is performance and growth. They know what they need to do a good job, which we don't do so well in teaching because we don't always know when we can walk away and go, you know what? Yeah, I've done a good job today. That's enough. And so I think when we look at workplace wellbeing through those three things, it allows us to start to shape our school strategy a little bit more targetedly at those key areas. And what I can share are three things I hear often. So within the qualitative data I collect, there are always three themes that come out no matter what school or where they are. So the first one is people really want time in their teams to collaborate and to connect and plan, but they want that to be uninterrupted. They want time for deep work. Now, if we look at Cal Newport's work around deep work, we're really aiming for about 2 hours. And if you reflect on what your non-contact timetable looks like at the moment, if you are lucky enough to have a 2-hour block, you might be able to get into some deep work, but I know many schools don't. So we do have some schools that are working on restructuring and organising their non-contact or release time so that these 2-hour blocks exist. And if you're not a teaching staff or if you're a school leader, allocating a time on your timetable that is deep work time. So no one can book it for a meeting. It's timetabled, it becomes common language. The second thing I hear a lot is around interruptions. People really struggle when there are constant interruptions or daily changes. And this happens because the predictability of the day is thrown. And we talk a lot about predictable routines for students, how it creates that safe learning environment. It's no different to staff. or for educators. And of course, there are sometimes, the fire alarm goes off, there's emergencies, those types of things happen. But what we really want to be building is what I call a locked calendar. So a calendar that's locked, a calendar that is clear, a calendar that people know what's happening. So we've started term 2. I think everywhere's back now in term 2. Your term 2 calendar should be done. Every excursion, every incursion, every assessment date, every event that's happening, every special celebration, every assembly, every camp, it should be on that calendar. And there are no last minute additions to that. Because when we continually have these last minute, oh yeah, we can do that, we'll add this in, oh, we forgot to tell someone, we'll put it in now, remind people, today's Wednesday, it'll happen Monday. We create this sense of like, what's coming. And so people can't be planned, they can't feel prepared because they live in this space of uncertainty. As a school leader, it is our job to make sure our calendar is stable. And then I call them calendar protocols. No new things this far out. Nothing to be added inside that 2-week window unless it's an absolute emergency. And then the third thing people really want to know is, what is the priority of our school right now? So people don't know what to engage in or what to pay attention to or what to make time for or what the right way to go about XYZ is if there are so many priorities. And middle leaders, we love our middle leaders, they all do a wonderful job, but often each middle leader will have a priority. Now, if you have 10 middle leaders in your school and they all have a priority and that's all feeding right down to the classroom, all of a sudden we've got educators in classrooms trying to do 10 different things. And so part of what's the priority is being really clear from leadership and middle leadership around what's the visibility of the priority? What are the action items that sit underneath it? How does this filter down into a workload funnel? Maybe we need to redistribute this so it's not so intense. Where are the parallels? Where are the things that might actually be in tension with one another rather than supporting? Can we change a rollout from term 1 right through to term 4 to something starting in semester 2 and rolling that way? Because what we're trying to do is decrease intensity, not devalue the priority, but just make sure that we can still do the priority its worth alongside everything else. So they'd be the 3 things. Give people time to plan, meet in teams, deep work regularly, reduce interruptions through really strong calendar protocols, and then also know priorities and know the distribution of that.
I love that. Absolutely relate with that time to have deep work. So one of the things that we're doing is meeting free day. Just a kind of simple idea around trying to allow ourselves time to do some deep work. Now, we are approaching towards the end. I really want to make sure that anyone who's got a burning question out there, put it in the chat. We'll see if we can get to it before we close. Maybe let's go to a wider community level now. And maybe if you can give us any thoughts that you have around, Liam, we'll jump to you, around schools developing wellbeing culture that extends beyond just teachers and students into the community. Any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think it's really important. And again, it's been touched on a few times today that everyone owns wellbeing. It's not necessarily just up to the school principal or middle leaders or a wellbeing champion that's just really passionate about this particular space. Like, everyone owns wellbeing. So one of the things that I've seen work incredibly well is being able to engage, as you said, Dan, the whole community. And there's a number of ways that you can do that. One of the most successful ways that I've seen that work is through an appreciative inquiry session. So whether it's that particular framework and approach where it's really using a strength lens, it's engaging as many of your community as possible. So you're getting representation from staff, you're getting representation from the executive level or leadership groups, you're getting representation from parents, you're getting representation from students as well. Because I think it's really important that we don't want to do well-being to someone, we want to do well-being with them. So I think it's engaging them, it's using a framework that ultimately works for you, whether it's the theory of change, whether it's through the appreciative inquiry approach, but it's engaging as much of your community as possible. And I think if you're able to do that and you're able to engage as many people as possible, then it's going to create the most lasting and scalable impact.
Yeah, I love that. Amy, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think community is a really interesting one. We always go straight to our students, no matter what we're doing. I was having a conversation today actually with someone about AI and how the conversation's all around students. And yet again, I'm going, yeah, but what about our educators? This was like such a gem here. But we go to our students straight away. And I think we've got to take a step back and realize that parent communities and also our teaching communities may not have had that same education and experience and understanding. So we've got to educate our communities, why does wellbeing matter? Because I see a lot of perception that it's because, there must be something negative going on, or people aren't well, or something's not good. And I think the first bit with communities is, and everyone in a school environment, is letting people know that the idea of wellbeing is not because we're not good enough. It's because we should have these great tools available to us all of the time. And one of the things I've done in a school that worked really well, we created a wellbeing and learning framework with each other, was sharing this with the community first, so educating them on what our pillars are around wellbeing and learning and why we've chosen them and where it comes from and the data and the input, but then also suggesting different activities. This term we're focusing on connection. This is how we define it. This is what you might see happening in classrooms. This is what you'll see teachers doing. We want to know what you do in a community, and then celebrating and sharing that and sharing it back with one another so people can start to see different ideas. The other thing that I have seen schools do, and I'm not a huge fan of wellbeing weeks all the time, because sometimes I think we might just want to do some work, and getting told to go home is not always helpful. But I have seen some schools shift this to call it a reset week. So rest and reset. No homework, no meetings, no co-curricular, no sports, nothing out of the ordinary at all. And it gives people an opportunity just to rest and reset. And that means if you want to do some work, you can do some work. If you need to have some extra meetings that you have been putting off and you need space to catch up on them, you can go and do that. So again, it's stepping into what do you need to rest and reset and feel like you can keep moving forward. And when we do that with our students in the community, it gives them a chance to actually take a step back as well. And then, of course, share and celebrate that.
Love that. Rest and reset. Love the concept. Look, I really think that everything that we've spoken about today is really powerful. And I hope there's a few bits and pieces that different members who are with us today have resonated with. But ultimately, we know everyone's just trying to do their best. We really hope that there are ways that could be scaled up just that little bit more for the benefit of everybody that is connected with schools. Before we close, I'd love to throw to both of you to ask you whether you have a book or a podcast or a resource that is, something you're into at the moment, or something that you might like to recommend in this space. Liam, anything to share?
Yeah, look, I'm an avid reader, and there's plenty of books. Something tangible, I think, for educators, and I know there's some really good work being done by the Wellbeing Distillery, so led by Justin Robinson and David Bott. I think they do some incredible work. Obviously, they came out of the Geelong Grammar Positive Education route and did some incredible work. But yeah, I'm a big fan of what they do, and yeah, I'd thoroughly recommend anyone on the call to have a good look at their work. But there is so much great work being done in this particular space. But again, I would suggest it's exploring what would work for your context. Wellbeing is infused across every aspect. It really is. So there is a significant number of books. Happy to talk offline about what they are, because yeah, I'm certainly an avid reader and happy to share.
Thank you, Liam. And of course, we'll disseminate all of this information and the different things that are happening through the chat with everybody in the post-program email. But of course, if anyone does want more information or to connect with our guests, please reach out to us. We can help. Amy, what can you suggest?
I mean, it would be rude of me not to suggest my own books, because they're great. But also, this is my book at the moment. I don't know if you can see it, Unstressable by Mo Gawdat. I'm recommending this. So Mo Gawdat was the CFO, I think, of Google, and he's got a really awesome story. But his mission is to make, I think it's 1 million people unstressable. So he actually has a background in engineering, and he's got this whole mathematical formula for stress. And it really has challenged some of my thinking of stress. And his message is, for most of us who live in a Western world where we've got our basic needs taken care of, is that 99% of our stress is caused by perception. And then he talks through that. So this is a really cool book. I'd go and listen to that. I'll read that. And then in terms of listening and podcast, I am very much an Andrew Huberman Lab podcast person, because what you're going to get has science behind it. And to be really honest, if ever I want to know about something, I just Google stress Andrew Huberman or stress Huberman Lab podcast and find it that way, because you're going to get someone reputable. He's done the research, 3 hours of information, which is a lot, but you can break it down. So they are my go-tos. And then when I see who Huberman's looked at, I go and look at that person a little bit more.
Love
I don't know
that.
if that's cheating, but that's how I do it.
No, not at all. And I love the echo from the chat from Nick Dyson around loving Huberman also. Look, wow. Where did the last 40 minutes or so go? Absolutely fascinating conversation. Really want to show my appreciation and thank our two guests for being here. It's a privilege to talk to you. I really hope that those of you listening can go out and take something that you've heard today and make it tangible, and try something different. But we're out of time. I do want to quickly share our next live learning session. We are going back with Nick Dyson to capabilities. Nick's going to be here with some special guests talking about building capabilities into a cramped curriculum. So very passionate, deep work that we have here at Future Anything. Really excited for Nick to jump on and share that learning in the next live learning session. Before you go, if you've got a takeaway or if you've got any further questions, put them in the chat because we'll make sure that we can answer any further questions and share your takeaways in the post-program email. But thank you for your time. Take care, and try something different to look after your well-being. Thank you.